and if you're jumping in on Facebook, if there's one or two favorite dishes, if your mom was a cook that she used to make, or grandma or somebody else, just kind of get that.
Your mom's all-time favorite.
Yeah. To cook or to eat?
Well, either way. I guess, hey, Alex, glad you could jump in with us. We're just, so we're getting folks in here. We're thinking about, preparing for Mother's Day. What was an all-time favorite dish? Maybe your mom, your grandma cooked that you would say were on your top favorites. Terry, you have any?
My mom was not the greatest cook in the world, but she did make really good spaghetti and meatballs. I remember that as a weekly staple at our house, and so I think of that. She used to like some foods that I would not like to eat. So one of her favorite foods was liverwurst, which I would not eat. So she would make sandwiches that were white bread, butter, and liverwurst. So not a fan favorite on my part. So Nikki is coming in. Hi, Nikki.
Looks like, hi, Nick. Here comes Barb. You have to unmute them, Terry,
I shouldn't.
I think so.
Hi.
Hey, Nikki. Up in Michigan.
Barb. Hi, Terry. Hi, Chip.
Good to see you all. Well,
I think you need to unmute Barb, Terry. I don't know. When I first come in,
I'm good.
Good. So we're just getting ready for Mother's Day, and we're talking about, as we were waiting for people, if there's a favorite dish your mom used to make or grandmother, what would it be? Terry said spaghetti and meatballs, and there was Italian in your background, right, Terry?
Right. So my dad's side of the family was Italian, so my maiden name was Giovinco. So it's Teresa Maria Giovinco. My mom's side was German, so she would make. So she learned the Italian cooking, I think, from probably my paternal grandmother. So.
My mom made everything. I can't really pick a favorite. I don't know. It was Pennsylvania Dutch cooking between her and my grandma and all the aunts and uncles. So yes, we ate pretty much everything. I guess chicken and dumplings was kind of a staple. That's a Dutch dish. Nobody could beat my mom's stuffing. So those dishes were a lot of memories. But she was an amazing cook, amazing baker. Won some bacon pies and all that stuff, but she just messed around with them at local fairs because she was a professional person in her life. Yeah, I can't think of one thing. Everything my mom made was good. But yes, she did try to serve us liver and onions, and we were required to finish our plates. That was not a good day.
No, that would be a terrible day.
Not a good day.
So we're just kind of gathering by talking about favorite dishes that our moms or grandmas cooked, like our favorites or possibly their favorites. So you guys
I think everything my mom and my grandmother cooked was my favorite.
I tell you're picky. Sherry Lynn said that she and her sisters argue over who makes mom's chicken cutlets the best. So maybe you guys will have to have a cook-off at Garfield and we'll vote on that. Hey, Jared Woodward, good to see you, bro. So as we're reflecting for Mother's Day, as people are gathering, I don't know, favorite food memory.
So Barbara, Nikki, anything come to mind, or Tracy?
Well, I have to go in an opposite direction. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and it kind of I don't know how to say this. Let's say my dad was very traditional, you're going to stay home and cook type of guy. and he did the shopping. So she made whatever he wanted, and it was, you better have a salad and a vegetable, and you got your potato and your meat. And the truth is, the meals I look forward to most were the ones we had out. My dad never wanted to go out. And so when my grandparents came, or there was some special occasion, that was when we went out and we had pizza and we had, stuff hamburgers, which we never had. We had junk food that we never had access to. So those were always, I think, associated with better times than eating at home. So those became the favorite meals. There you go.
Hmm. Well, my mom made a really good carrot cake with cream cheese frosting.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and
That's my Achilles heel, man.
carrot cake. And she would do that like for the holidays and that type of thing. I remember though, and have the recipe. And the other thing she did was it was a baked bean dish, but it was like baked beans on steroids because it had like 9 different beans in it and sausage and onions, bell pepper, bacon, the whole gamut. You could eat it for a meal, actually, not just as a side dish. So those were probably her 2 best, and I inherited those recipes and make those faithfully.
All right. Yeah, try that carrot cake.
I make a one too.
Gathering with us, hey Ann, we see you online. If you're gathering with us online, we're just kind of as a way of opening, just thinking of Mother's Day this weekend. We focused the Faith on Friday today around the women of faith. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But if you have a favorite kind of, my mom cooked a real mean, whatever it is, or your grandmother, one of those dishes that kind of become part of your family story, just share them on Facebook in the comments. We'd like to hear them. So Nick, did you have anything?
Ironically, of all the great things that my mom cooks, she used to be a caterer and she's making right now. I love her potato salad. She knows that. And I love her sloppy joes. I know, of all the great things. And that's what we're having today. And I know it's a little weird. My senior picture on the wall.
Yeah.
My siblings are like, they get little pictures in places and then they never took the baby off the wall. So it's weird that I'm sitting. This is not my bedroom. This is at my parents' house. So
Yeah.
I don't put portraits of myself.
Up in Michigan. Well, it's an interesting look to see you there and like your former self, like shadow.
I know. She was a hot mess. You got the better version for sure.
Well, it's interesting because Barb, you were talking about kind of that traditional, male female role in middle class America in the 40s and 50s, I guess, or whatever. And I was kind of born into that, which is interesting. I was born in 62. I was the youngest. My sisters were 13 and 9 years older than me. So they were born, 1950 and 1954, I guess. But growing up as the baby in the house, it was definitely that. My dad was treasurer of Youngstown Sheet and Tube. He'd go to work. Mom would be home doing laundry, doing meals. But, the girls are getting educations. We were all in the family business. They made my dad sign something that the business comes to the girls first, not to the boy, just because he's a boy, because he's the youngest. So I remember those conversations, everything. And then I grew up with these women that became super professional. Not in a revolt, but just kind of, they enjoyed cooking. They enjoyed, and my sisters bought a business in the trucking industry. So they were one of the first women-owned businesses in the trucking agency. So when I was like 8 years old, if I said salesmen at the table, my sister punched me out, So, I didn't have to go to Princeton to learn inclusive language. I learned it at 8 years old at my dinner table. And then, my mom is part of when my parents bought a steel manufacturing business. She was, VP. She did the union negotiations. And because a lot of my friends ended up playing professional sports, she became the first ever woman NBA agent and NFL agent in history with active players. So it was in that traditional mold, but then here my mom's, going to NBA All-Star games and negotiating contracts. And she had a general manager for the Detroit Pistons that came down to her house. They were going to do a negotiation. She said, "Oh, just come down to the house if you're going to be in Cleveland." And he even wrote out, he said, "I gave up too much money because this woman made me a meal and cooked me a pie that I never had made to do that before." So it's weird. I mean, I have memories of kind of both worlds, and I don't know, I just walked in that. But man, it never changed. Even think of my sisters run their business. They would have the slow cooker on. They're cooking for their kids. Their husbands weren't necessarily cooks. I didn't cook a lot. I always cooked fish because I fished a lot, but really wasn't. I've said this before. Like my second year at Garfield, that I decided to take up cooking as another hobby, which my wife was very happy about. So she hasn't cooked for the last, what's that now? About the last 14 years. She turned all the cooking over my way. So, but anyhow, interesting.
Which is actually a pretty good segue into talking about images of God and masculine, feminine. Very often we think of God as Father, our Father who art in heaven. Jesus calls God Daddy, really. But Chip did a sermon more than a couple years ago on Mother's Day, and he asked, "Is it okay to call God Mom?" So we thought it'd be kind of interesting to hear a little bit about that perspective, because most of us are brought up with a very male image of God, and but that's actually not biblical.
Well, it's biblical, but it's not the whole.
Or it's not the whole story.
Not the whole story. Yeah, it's funny. I preached that sermon. Gosh, it's so long ago now. I think back when it probably was controversial. It's not very controversial now, but I got to think that was probably my second Mother's Day at Garfield. So it was probably like 14 years ago. And since then, I've tried to use a lot of the imagery. But Terry brought up today and wanted me to go back on a little bit. And I went back and looked at some of the scriptures. So I'll just share them. I can get to it. Hang on. Just imagery where God, was presented with the maternal aspects of God too. I think one of the things I say is that, the parent-child, there's so many metaphors that God uses to convey who God is to us. We get God as king, God as shepherd, but the father-son relationship of the Abba and Jesus, and that parent-child imagery, as we see in the scriptures, is the most profound, I think, and it was the most offensive to religious people. For religious people, it was okay to call God king or God holy or God, even like a shepherd king. But you start going around saying God's my daddy, like Jesus did with Abba. Now that got the high priest prickly, because God was too holy to have that kind of relationship. So the parent-child image with God is so important. And I think obviously in Middle Eastern Jewish culture of the first century, it's a very patriarchal society. Women, unfortunately, had very few rights. So the image of God as a father, in that sense of voice and I don't want to say control. I don't know what a good word is, but authority. But to have that and yet be so loving and so kind. In fact, when Jesus depicts God as a father in the parable of the prodigal son, the father doesn't act very fatherly, picking up his skirts and running out to meet the son. A lot of people say he was really acting like a mom. And then when his older son was being a spoiled brat and wouldn't come in and embarrassed him at the big meal, no self-respecting Jewish father would go out and negotiate with a brat like that, but he goes and does it. And so even the image of God as father is a very accessible, very loving, very compassionate image. But I just went through some that we see when Jesus wept over Jerusalem. I was remembering with Terry, maybe I'll find a picture while we're talking, but on our tours to the Holy Lands, when you come down the Mount of Olives and you see this spot basically where you would look out over the whole city, And most scholars believe these are the places where Jesus went and just wept over the city that, you know, was supposed to be the city of God and just became the city of people with all their problems. And he weeps here. We've heard it before. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I've longed to gather you together as a mother hen gathers her chicks up under her wings, but you were not willing. So a very maternal image, again, as a mother hen. Deuteronomy says that God, like a mother eagle, is like a mother eagle that stirs up its nest, hovers over its youngs, that spreads its wings to catch them and carries them aloft. So actually, that's the scripture most often referred to in the "He will lift you up like eagle's wings" there in Isaiah. Hosea, I love the prophets, because the prophets, we always think of the prophets bringing the doom and gloom and the word of judgment of God. Abraham Heschel, great Jewish rabbi, friends with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., marched together. He was an amazing scholar, and I have every book he's ever written. And what Heschel said is that the prophets also show us not just the word of God, but the heart of God. He called it the pathos of God, that you can feel God's passion and emotion speaking through the prophets to his people that are usually going off to worship other gods. And this one, Hosea 11, is one of my, I think, the most passionate of all the prophets. You can feel God's heart in this. He says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. Out of Egypt, I called my son. So referral back to rescuing them from Egypt. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me, right? You can feel that parent's heart in those verses. Some of us have gone through that. It was I who taught Ephraim, and that was just another word for the people of Israel. It was referring to the northern kingdom. It was I that taught them to walk, taking them by the arms. I remember I have pictures of my kids teaching them to walk where you're holding them like puppets, right, as they get their sea legs. But they didn't realize that it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness. That has really struck me, because that word there for cords is in the Hebrew, the word for umbilical cord. So it's almost God saying, I led them with an umbilical cord of human love and care, with ties, if you see that image, of love. To them, I was like one who lifts a little child up to the cheek. That is definitely an image of a maternal aspect. And I bent down to feed them. Isaiah picked that up in a couple places. Isaiah 66, I will extend peace to her like a river. You will nurse and be carried. Now think about that. He's saying to the people, what he said there, I carried you here. I'm carrying you and I'm nursing you on her arm and dandled on her knee. As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you. And Isaiah 49:15, an expression that Jesus quoted later in John's gospel in reference to the cross, but where God says, speaking to the people about will he forget them or not, he says, can a woman forget her nursing child or show none compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. And then I pulled, Terry actually found this one today, and I found it really, really good for our conversation. The psalmist one time, you know, in the Psalms, as I said, when we were getting ready for all this and really practicing extraordinary prayer, whatever we're reading in scriptures, it's good to read the Psalms. I think when you're sheltered and there's a pandemic or there's crises, I know after 9/11, I just sat and read Psalms. But Psalm 131, too, I like what the psalmist says. He says, I've calmed and quieted myself, right? So he's obviously been disturbed, anxious, but I found a way to calm and quiet myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. And he reads in the psalm, he's talking about he learned to quiet himself with God. And now he's feeling like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child. I am content. It's like saying I'm crawling up into God's lap, like crawling up into a mother's lap. So, yeah, I mean, as I shared in my message that day, you know, for some people, the images are never enough. For some, God as a father isn't helpful because maybe they didn't have a father growing up, or an absentee father, or an abusive father. And for some, that hasn't been helpful. For some, God as a mother may not be helpful. And I've heard those kind of strained relationships. So once again, we need to remember this is the best of that intended created relationship that God's trying to show us. I'm a father who will never abuse his children. I'm a mother who will never abandon her children. And so to see that holistic aspect of the parental nature of God is helpful to me. And I'm comfortable, we pray in the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven. I'm comfortable with that. I call God Abba a lot in my prayers, which is the name Jesus referred to as God, which really offended the religious folks because that was closer to daddy than it was father. It's really like Papa. And so knowing that image and knowing the perfected goal of the parent-child relationship, and God has engaged us so much to be part of that, that's what is to move us. And it moves me. And there's times, like I say, we remembering our mothers, or, I was a mama's boy by far. Her death, just a couple months after I came to Garfield, really, really rattled me, and I miss her every day. And there's just times where I remember things about her that I could kind of insert to the story, like, oh, well, that was a godly characteristic of who God is. That in a healthy way is helpful for me. So I don't know, Terry, that's a little bit of a rambling kind of remembrance of a sermon from 14 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful because we don't always think of God in that kind of a nurturing way. And so I just think as we're thinking about moms, and it's really good to have that grounding and to remember that. So, and we thought we'd spend a little bit of time thinking about and talking about it, hoping you guys would share stories. And if you're watching us on Facebook, we're glad you're here, and we hope you'll jump in and share your stories too. But about how our moms or other influential women helped to shape our faith or are shaping our faith now. It could even be an author. I was thinking earlier today of Julian of Norwich, who was a nun in the Middle Ages in the time of one of the plagues. And, she has really kind of inspired me by some of her writings. And so we just want to hear some stories as we're looking towards Mother's Day and see what you guys might share on that. And
Facebook, just fire into the comments.
Yeah. And I shared a little bit in the e-note this week that, my mom had, been very faithful in church, brought us to church all the time. After she died when I was 11, my dad made us continue to go, at least until we were confirmed, but that's another story. So I didn't have that much of a formation from her. But then later in life, when I'm in my late 20s and coming to Christ as an adult, I found her Bible in the attic. And it was, she had made a cover for it. It's black velvet with the, Holy Bible embroidered in gold thread. And it had notes from sermons. It had notes from Bible studies. It had all those things. So for me to encounter it at that time in my life, when I'm just coming to faith, was like being able to have a Bible study with my mom, which I never got to do, in my life otherwise. So that has been a precious gift. I actually have it at the church office on my bookshelf, and I take it out every once in a while. But so even though my mom, and she, I learned from her in terms of faith. I saw her reading her Bible all the time. I saw her teach Sunday school, and really sing hymns in the kitchen, very out of tune, but she would sing hymns in the kitchen. Battle Hymn of the Republic, A Mighty Fortress. She was a good Lutheran. So the Luther hymns, but those are things that almost like in retrospect, she continued to form me. It's like I didn't have much, this is going to sound the wrong way. I didn't have much use for, I didn't pick up the tools that I was given then, but I was able to go back later and receive faith formation from her. So I consider that really a gift. So just anybody on Facebook, type in the comments, or you guys.
Well, for me, I didn't really go to church until I was an adult. Even though, my mom was right there, and, I knew that she believed in God, we didn't go to church coming up. We just didn't. But I will say later on in life, when I got to be like in my 30s, her and I went to church together. And she also got baptized at 70. So even though she passed, I know that I'll see her again, because she did accept the Lord as her Savior. So I really didn't have that teaching. I didn't get involved until later on. But I will also say, if we did the communication class that we did, she would be a straight blue all the way. She was very meticulous and orderly. And she always looked for safety in places. Even, up to the end, she had like a chunky notebook that she kept meticulous notes in. Sometimes those notes were accurate later on in life because she wasn't in her right mind and she was writing notes. But again, she had that one area that she, kind of chronicled everything. So I would even say, to the millennials, as you get, for instance, prayer journals and that type of thing, avoid putting those in the cloud. Write that stuff down on paper so that it's there for you to pass on, because those are the treasures that I have now that she's gone. Going back and looking at different notations that she's made in her hand, or even recipes that she's written in her hand, mean the world to me now that she's not here.
Well, I shared earlier, I'll just share quickly. There's a place that Paul is writing to Timothy, and Timothy's one of his young lieutenants. And Timothy's going through a faith crisis himself. Paul's in prison. It's like, where's this thing going? And Paul writes to encourage him. He says, look, I know your faith, Timothy. He said, I saw it in your grandmother. I saw it in your mother. And I know it's in you. And that's always struck with me, because I really am the product of really strong women of faith. My grandmother is an amazing woman of faith. There was an old story around the house. She directed her choir, and I got some relatives in here, so they're going to fact check me, I'm sure. But she was choir director at her church, Methodist Church in Campfield, for 38 years as a single mom, when that was no badge of honor. People would say your grandma's a tough old bird. She was, but I came along so late, she could just be a grandma with me, because I was so much after all the other kids, my cousins and my sisters, 13, 9 years. And boy, I'd sit on her lap during choir practice, and she would always come over to the house and stay with us on Christmas Eve to be there on Christmas Day, but she would come late because the church always had 11 o'clock service. So she'd sleep in my room, and they always let me stay up late that night till grandma came. That was always something I was waiting for. And my mom told me a story that, the next day, her and my mom would be making the Christmas meal for everybody and the whole deal. But once I was an infant, I have no way of proving this, that my grandma was just walking around with me singing all the hymns of the church, And my mom was getting frustrated because she needed help in the kitchen. And she said, Mom, I need your help over here. Can you put the baby down? And she says, shh, I'm programming him. I don't know if that's true, but it's a wonderful image. And she did program me in a lot of ways. And I shared about this at noon. My mom, what I love, everything, I learned about God. I learned really with my mom, and talking to me about my Bible and prayer. And those are things that were meaningful parts of discussions. You had to have the birds and the bees talk growing up. You had all these talks. But there was never a conversation that my mom didn't, hey, well, how are you doing with God right now? And what are you praying about lately? You don't have to tell me everything, but when I was little. And then I remember, gosh, even in my teenage years, when I lost my first pet, everybody knows that's traumatic when you're like 13, 14 years old. And she cried with me with it, and then said, what do you think God's showing you right now? What do you think? It was always a faith piece to it. When I wanted to get a Division I basketball scholarship, and I was working so hard at it, yeah, she'd rebound for me and pass. So I work on my, free throw percentage, get up there, and we have those memories. There'll be times sitting around. She said, well, if God's given you this ability, how's your faith? Do you pray before games? It was like, it was never like reading some track, but everything had a faith component. And I just am so appreciative for her for that, because it kept me aware. And I shared growing up with her, we were in a very large church, very white church. And it was the kind of church that a lot of people didn't shout amen or anything, but you could hear a pin drop during the sermon. And great preacher we had back then. It was very kind of theatrical. All the lights would go down. The only light would be on him, And, by the time I was 17, 18 years old, I really understood his sermons. I'm 12, I'm not getting it. The thing that always struck me is I sit by my mom and she's crying during the sermon, like just tears. And I'd be like, this has to be some really important stuff. I don't get it right now, but it had my attention because it had her heart. And I never forget that. So those are, that's me, I'm done.
And as we're talking about this, it may not be a mom or a grandma. It may be somebody, I can think of people that were really influential in my faith when I was coming back to God, that taught me how to pray, or prayed with me, or prayed for me. And I didn't, I never been part of extemporaneous prayer in my life. I thought all prayers had to be read. So, so it could be really kind of anybody. But Nikki, anything come to mind?
Yeah, so again, I definitely didn't grow up in a church, but in the most the craziest time in my life, I'll just refer to, there was this little nun, and her name was Sister Toma. And she used to tiptoe where, I was young, I was in trouble, I had to go away when I was 18, and she would come into a facility, and she didn't care, like, she's coming, like, you're letting me in. This could never happen now. This is 25 years ago, but she would go there and tell the guards, I'm going to see her 3 times a week at least. And she was just this little nun, and I learned no scripture from her. I didn't learn a thing. I just learned that she really knew how to love people, that she really did. And she didn't care. She was the sweetest thing. And when I got, she held my hand as long as she could through that. And, and it still took a while, it still was a few years. And then, it's funny, I go back, and my mother, bless her heart, she's a sweetheart. I'd write letters home, and she saved, and I still have a book of them, and she saved them, and she laminated them, and she stuck them in a book. And I look back at it sometimes, because I thought I thought I met God. I thought I knew where I met God. Like in my mind, I thought I met God at Garfield Memorial Church early on. Like, I thought that was exactly where my first real encounter was. But when I go back to those letters, it was like, wow, no, that's not it. So it was a little Catholic nun who I had not one thing in common with, nothing. And she's gone now, but she taught me how to just simply just love someone. It doesn't, so that was like my first, my mom is my father is a very nurturing, loving person. My mom was the person that put the smack down. So my dad had the easy job, and he still does. And so it was, but one thing and I don't want to ramble too much either, but Chip, you also preached a sermon, and I don't know what day it was, but it was about 5 years ago, about, I have a father who's very, very affectionate, and, he's getting older, and you had spoke about us worshiping people, and who's your, I thought my dad was God my whole life. I still think he's amazing. But you know, I know who my father is, my eternal father.
Mhm.
So I yeah, that's a little rambling, but little Toma, Sister Toma, she was
Yeah, I
awesome.
love this. I've never heard you tell that story. I love her already.
Yeah, she was awesome.
So Barb, anybody come to mind for you?
My family was not in any way religious, and my mom died in 99. Absolutely, a friend, a community friend, local here, named Adrian. I met her in a weight loss group, and you know, I'm trying to think. The first time she asked me to come to church with her, it was, you know, it was not hard to say, you know, I don't think so. But
Right.
as we became friends, um, and she became, how do I say this? She was what an NAP, a non-anxious presence. I don't know if you've come across that before. I am not socially adept, and she was just easy to be around, and we became really good friends. And frankly, I went to church just because it would make her happy.
Mm.
And I often say she dragged me to church. She dragged me to church activities. She never dragged me anywhere. I want to make that clear. When I say that, I mean that I kind of stumbled along unwillingly, but it's just really hard not to attribute so much to her. She, you know, we would have a lot of discussions about religion because I like to argue. And she would say, you know, I can't really answer this. Why don't you come talk to my pastor? And it's just like, whoa. And even when I got into church, being very unsocial, it's really hard. You got to not just be in church, you've got to participate. You've got to make an effort. And she's the one that it was always her presence that got me places until I started wanting to do it on my own. Until something happened within me that made me realize that was the place I wanted to be.
Mhm.
So I have to say, and she's still in my life. She's 5'2", 80 pounds of dynamo, but
Mm.
yet still just a loving, kind person that really emanates, that loving spirit. And it's so Adrian, definitely.
Yeah, well, look at you and Nikki's stories. Like those are the best witnesses. Those are the better angels. I mean, you know, people say, well, Chip, you can get up there and wax eloquent on the scripture. And well, Satan did a good job waxing eloquent in the scriptures with Jesus. But I think those really honest, authentic, relatable witnesses that demonstrate love and care and, you know, let us go at our own pace. And, you know, because Terry and I mean, Terry lost her mom at 11. I had my mom around, but both of us left church and swore we'd never go back. So we've had that experience. And, you know, it was 7 years before I darkened the door of a church because I was just sure the church was racist, sexist, didn't care about the poor, a bunch of hypocrites, phonies. Um, and, you know, but I think of my mom during that time, and she didn't like it, but she was just so gentle with me. And, you know, how you doing? And still asking me, what do you think's God's saying to you? I mean, not talking to me, God, Mom, I'm not in church. Well, God doesn't need the church, you know. So I just think those reliable witnesses that love us completely as who we are, not as who they would want us to be, right? And it's so Jesus-y to me because I keep thinking about, and the older I get, I mean, I look at, you know, I read those gospels over and over again. It didn't matter who you were. Jesus was the safest place to be. I mean, it just didn't matter. You could go to him. You could be Nicodemus, the most holy man with all the knowledge and a good person. And Jesus broke him down to say, you need to be born again, but we're safe. Let's talk it out. You know, you could be prostitute washing his feet with tears and drying with his hair, and you're at the right place to be. It's just, I think those witnesses remind us of that safe space that Jesus created that ought to be in every church. And unfortunately isn't sometimes, and it bothers me. And I work really, really hard to try to make sure, that's why safety is our number one core value at Garfield, that we, you know, people will be at different stages. We're gonna love each other because we're gonna go in before a master king was, if anybody has a right to judge us, it's that one. And he offers us love and grace and acceptance, and let's go and be in his presence. Okay, they got me preaching. I need a shush.
We've got Larry came in, Loretta, Johnny, Pastor Steve, and Larry said, my mother embodied everything a person should be in a Christian and someone I miss every day.
Feel you,
Thank you, Larry. And you
And
know,
I see Amanda, one of my former youth out there. This has been so crazy during pandemic times. I got family members that jump into these. I got people I went to high school with. I had some youth that aren't youth anymore. They're grown people. And anyhow, the fact that they think they still want to spend 3 minutes with me after not seeing them for 30 years, they're kind of cool.
so Tracy, Wally, any things come to mind? Any stories?
For me, mine was kind of a three-pronged attack because my grandmother was the matriarch of my family. And I remember Sunday mornings as a kid, you smell the food because she got up very early to start cooking. You smell the food and you would hear her humming spirituals. And then she would sing a little bit. She couldn't sing very well, but you felt the love and the love of God through her just humming. And then my mother, who didn't get into the church until she was older, was just the strong arm, but she was the protecting arm. I was a handful as a young man.
I can believe that.
It still is sometimes.
And she was the protector. She wrapped me in her arms and made sure that I was safe. And she's only about 5'1".
Mhm.
But she was the boss.
Yeah.
And I have an aunt who, and I'm blessed to still have my mom and my aunt who lives in California. But I had cancer 3 different times. And I didn't call my mom right away. I called my aunt because she was
The prayer
the
warrior.
prayer warrior and is the prayer warrior. And so that was the first person I called because I knew she had a direct line. My friends sometimes say my prayers may not reach further than the ceiling, but I knew hers would get through. And so I'm blessed to have a family who love me, love God, and to have a wife that brought me to Garfield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have all the women in my family.
That's good. I think
And you got
probably
more emotional than anything I've ever experienced.
yeah. Barbara, she's had some problems before with her wireless cutting out, so I hope she can get back in, Terry, if she needs to. Pastor Steve just said, my mother is the single greatest influence in my ministry. I learned to pray, study the Bible, and serve from my mother. Hey, Steve, we hear that. I believe that too.
So Tracy, I know it's you lost your mom pretty recently.
Yeah, this will be the first Mother's Day. Yep.
And as I think Chip was saying the other day, this would be a year of first, or Terry was saying, somebody was saying it.
Mhm.
This will be a year of first for her. And so we'll work through that. And thank God we've got you guys to bounce off of.
Good about you, for sure. And you know,
The stories.
I wouldn't put. I would just say to you, as a brother, you know. I mean, I don't want to go too deep. I went a little bit at noon, and maybe you guys know. I know Nikki does, but you know. So my mom was born on Christmas Day, So she was like the ghost of Christmas present on steroids, especially being a Jesus uh, person that she was, to have the birth of Christ coming into the world and something that, you know, was just so in her tradition, have her children or grandchildren. It just, it was incredible. And she died suddenly on Christmas Eve. And it was the day before her 75th birthday. And it was my first Christmas Eve at Garfield. She died about 2 a.m. Had a terrible stroke suddenly on December 23rd. Had my boys up to the queue for a basketball game on December 22nd. So it shows you how sudden it was. But passed away in the early bits of the morning. And, you know, I had just come to Garfield 2 months earlier. I got there in late September. So I guess 3 months. And Terry McHugh, you know, we became friends pretty quick, but she was saying, Chip, I got this. Don't worry about it. And I was like, I felt like I would just be letting my mom down if I let her death that day prevent me from preaching my first 3 Christmas Eve sermons at Garfield. So I drove back and preached 3 Christmas Eve sermons. And, you know, my son sang in the little Christmas pageant with tears going down his eyes. And then, you know, people were thought, well, we trying to be heroic or something. I was just kind of living out of the faith that she instilled in me, you know? And so I would only go back in nostalgia to say, I thought maybe the first Christmas Eve after that was going to be the worst, or the first Mother's Day were going to be, they're all the worst. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like each, and they're all the best too. You know, it really is, as people of faith, it gives us an opportunity to grieve, which we need to do. I've said God wouldn't give us tear ducts and weren't supposed to use them. But thank God we have those little benchmarks that just cause us to remember and think back. You know, in African tribal religion and in Native American religion, I've studied extensively, and I think we're very, very pure religious kind of understandings that to forget the ancestors created angry spirits, you know, like, and I think I don't necessarily believe in angry spirits, but yeah, thank God we've got these moments where we remember the ancestors, we remember our moms. And so my prayers will be with you on this one, but each one is going to have its own times of remembrance that bring grief and bring joy. Because I got to tell you, it's I mean, it was 2004, it was 16 years ago. It's like it was yesterday, but I get those times to remember, which I'm really glad for. And so I would hope you know, have this first one. That'll be my prayer for you, just with joy and tears.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah.
And I think this one will be a little tougher because we won't have a family gathering.
Yeah, of course.
That makes it tougher.
We're learning to do all that. I don't know that I ever needed to learn how to do it, but we're learning. I remember one of the most powerful sermons I ever heard. I think we have it in our bookstore. We've had it for people who've gone through grief. William Sloane Coffin was an amazing preacher, followed Harry Emerson Fosdick at Riverside Church, and then James Forbes followed him. But his 27-year-old son died in a traffic accident while he was a pastor there at Riverside. And so when he got the ability to go back into the pulpit, you know, it takes your wind out of you. It took weeks or whatever. He preached on the loss of his son, and there was a great sermon. Like I said, we've got in the bookstore. Remind me when we're back in person thing. I'll hand you a copy. But he said, you know, after the grief, then comes the learning. And he said this thing I've never forgotten. He said, after the grief, then comes the learning, which better be good given the price. And you know, that's so true, because learning, I'd rather be the stupidest person in the world and have to gain the wisdom we've had to gain through the trenches of adversity. So we're all in this learning time during this weird time.
Yeah.
Learning better be good given the price. So anyhow.
Had a few more people pop in on Facebook, Michelle and Lucky and Justin. And we're just wrapping up now, but
I gotta wrap up. I've talked too much.
Any other stories? Nikki had to go eat the dinner that her mom prepared for her. favorite foods.
That's good.
So,
Yeah, she's up in Michigan.
yep. So,
And you
Okay.
should have worn a yellow T-shirt today, Chip.
I got blue on. I was halfway there.
Pastor Steve says, sweat glands cool the body, tear ducts cool the soul.
Oh. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, my sister was on the House of Prayer line, and one of the earliest ones, and she was crying in there, and then I had to laugh with her because she was my sister. I wasn't there; I was young, but they said when she was born, she had blocked tear ducts, and they had to surgically open her tear ducts. And she always says, "Boy, once they did,
No turning them off.
boy, once they did."
Mhm.
Good word.
Well,
Oh.
any last words before we close? Well, we will see everybody on Sunday for worship and praying for everybody. And, like so many firsts, right? Like you just said.
Yeah.
Well, I hope this current series is helping you. I think it's for such a time as this. It's sure helping me to sit in there and think about, what Paul was talking about, putting on the whole armor, what things we put on.
Mhm.
And I, tried to share the first 2 weeks, kind of why, what we're up against. And then Scott this week is going to begin to take that pivot now into, all right, what are we doing then to begin to move out, even though Chip's up what's out there and what we're up against and breaking the lies over our lives and all those things. How do we begin to do that? And then Terry and Steve and Scott and myself will break down all those little elements, that are listed in that. And I don't know, I hope it's helpful. I got caught delivering a sign, which I don't like.
More than one.
Huh?
You got caught more than one.
I only got caught. I delivered my first 24 and only one person caught me.
Seven caught you after that.
Yeah, well, I was ringing doorbells too. So I was kind of, some of our your older folks, I was going to ring the doorbell and let me be caught. I think I was legitimately nabbed by 3 people, let's put it that way. But it was funny. Each one of them came out and just wanted to say, how their family's watching the series and how they're really feasting off it. And, said even my teenagers are saying, oh, I understand this a little better. That nothing blesses me more. So I hope it's a helpful series for all of you.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. And the women's group too is falling right in line with the sermon. We had our first meeting yesterday. It went very well. So. Yeah,
Ramona said she emailed Terry and copied me in.
Oh, okay. Yep, it went well.
Well, you're focusing on the armor of God. I mean, Lord have mercy, it's right there. And I told one of our members who was saying, oh man, you guys picked the perfect series. And I have to tell them, we plan our series a year in advance in June. And we actually had this on the docket. We had it at different times. We didn't know what we were going to call it, but we knew, the old church calls it spiritual warfare. I don't want to just focus on all the war imagery. But, we had it on 17 and 19. And then this year we said, no, that'd be a good thing to do after Easter. So we had it on the books. And then when we looked ahead because we want to make sure when something changes like the world did, is this a good series to be talking about right now? And we're thinking like, good Lord, this is the best series to be talking about right now. And then we just took the language of PPE, which is in people's vernacular, and folk have really appreciated it. But I had to tell them, you got to give credit where the credit due. The Holy Spirit gets credit for this series.
All right. Well, good to see you all. Medicine for the soul as always. So we will see you next time.
Thanks for jumping in.
Have a great week.
We'll see you guys soon. I look forward to seeing you Sunday. God bless.